Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for taking the time to join us today. Hopefully everyone is staying safe. I know working from home and the remote situation has been a unique challenge for us all, and hopefully everyone is adjusting well. But I just wanted to start off by just saying thank you for joining us. We're excited to show you the new cost transfer policy today. It's been a labor of love getting this passed through, and we're excited to show you all the information we're going to share with you today. So as you guys know, uniform guidance has been for a while now, and the audit environment has become increasingly more intense and more frequent. So it's really not a matter of if we're going to be audited, but when and by whom. So as we go through, and as you know, we go through an extensive single audit each year, and we've also gone through several sponsor audits, both from the federal side through with large federal agencies such as NSF and private. And during these audits, cost transfers are heavily being targeted and scrutinized. And as a result, they really do pose the greatest risk to the university. And so per the direction of the board and leadership from the top down, we have developed the following cost transfer policy, and we're super excited to share it with you today. So today we're going to go over what a cost transfer is, cost transfers that may be allowable, cost transfers that are not allowable, and then timing of those cost transfers. And we're also going to go over the retro funding change process again, just because we still get a lot of questions related to those, and we thought it would be helpful. And salary is the most common cost transfer that we see related to grants. We're going to discuss some helpful tips and then also tell you where you can find resources if you have additional questions. So the title, or the official title, of the new cost transfer policy is FINA 3.35, Grants and Funds Management Cost Transfer Policy. And the purpose of this policy is to set forth the University of South Carolina's requirements for cost transfers to, from, or between sponsored projects. And the definition of a cost transfer is any reassignment or transfer of charges between accounts. And we really wanted to remind everyone that this includes both direct charges and cost share. A lot of times people get confused as it relates to cost share being counted as a cost transfer. Just because we're not changing where that cost is doesn't mean that external sponsors don't see it and view it as a cost transfer. Just because we're not changing the source of funding, we are actually placing a cost share tag onto it. So in their eyes, just because the mechanism in which we record cost share may not mean that we're moving the actual expense, placing that tag on it is in essence a cost transfer. So don't get confused by the way that we process cost transfer or cost share here with what actually makes it a cost transfer in the eyes of external sponsors. And we did want to remind you that transfers between projects within the same budget year and funded under the same federal award that are considered just inter-award reallocations aren't subject to this policy. So we're not talking about those instances. So some cost transfers that may be allowable. And again, all cost transfers are going to flow through Grants and Funds Management to determine whether or not it is allowable. And there are going to be 3 prerequisites that we consider in that determination. The first one is that cost transfer providing a direct benefit to the project it's being charged to? The second one is, does it comply with the university policy and the sponsor's terms and conditions? And then the last one is it fully documented? As we mentioned in the beginning, all cost transfers are being heavily scrutinized by sponsor auditors and our external auditors. And the first thing they want is documentation. Why did you decide to move this so late after the original charge? How did it directly benefit this project? So if we don't have sufficient documentation, we're not going to be able to approve the movement of those expenses. And of course, there's always other factors that may affect whether or not that expense is allowable, and we'll get into that a little bit later on another slide. So here are some examples of cost transfers that may be allowable. Again, if the cost transfer occurred within 90 days of the original expense, if you noticed you had an account change that didn't take effect for a particular person, so you need to do a retro funding change for 1 or 2 payrolls, and you caught it within 90 days, that's perfectly allowable. If you need to correct due to untimely receipt of information by the university, so you got a late notice of award, that's another example of a cost transfer that may be allowable. If you need to reallocate effort based on actual effort expended, again, as long as we're keeping that 90 days and we're catching it timely, because again, sponsors expect us to have internal controls sufficient enough to catch things like that, is another example of a cost transfer that may be allowable. If we need to move pre-award costs to the appropriate project in accordance with uniform guidance, or to correctly allocate costs benefiting more than one project. For example, let's say you purchase supplies that you're actually going to be using to support 3 or 4 projects that you're working on. It's absolutely 100% appropriate to allocate those appropriately to all 4 of those projects versus charging it 100% to just one. So that's another example where it would be perfectly allowable to cost transfer those expenses. And then if you need to remove unallowable charges or out of period charges, those are also perfectly allowable cost transfers. So then some cost transfers that are not allowable under any circumstances are to correct deficiencies caused by overruns or other funding considerations. So if you have an overage on one project, you cannot arbitrarily move it to another sponsored project. And this is specifically written and stated in uniform guidance. And this is another area that the auditors are targeting. And so we really need you guys to be on guard for this. So if you overspend an award by $1,000, you can't arbitrarily decide to move exactly $1,000 of expenses to another award. We are watching it centrally the best we can. And so expect to see additional scrutiny being placed on this because we're getting additional scrutiny placed on us. So all it takes is one sponsor to disallow it and decide that that's a finding, and they can extrapolate those results across all their funding across the university. And that's how you see universities make the news with those huge settlements. So just be aware of that. It may not seem like it's a big deal, but it's really a huge deal. And it puts the university at great risk. Another example is to avoid restrictions imposed by law or by terms of the sponsored project. So in this case, going back to the supplies example, let's say you have an award that will only pay for salary and fringe, but you need supplies to support this project. So you decide to use another grant project that allows supplies, but you're not really using them there. That's not allowed. So make sure you're only spending the awards as appropriate and as outlined by the award budget and the terms of the agreement. Other cost transfers that are not allowable, you're not allowed to park expenses, which will subsequently be transferred elsewhere. And this includes to competing or non-competing continuations of the same project for which the notice of award or new project has not been received. So this is where risk accounts become really, really important. You absolutely, when you get those 90 and 30-day notices, you need to start thinking about what do I need in order to make sure I'm not parking expenses for the next year while I wait on that next notice of award to come in, so that I'm not parking expenses where they don't belong. This causes huge invoicing issues as well as financial reporting issues, which can lead to issues with the sponsor, and collection issues, which then leads to write-off issues that could be funded by your A or E funds. So again, this is all to protect the university, to protect you, to protect the PIs, not to mention that it, again, is specifically outlined in uniform guidance as unallowable. So please, please, please work with your SAM administrators to determine what you need as it relates to setting up risk accounts so that you are not parking expenses where they do not belong. And then last but not least, another cost transfer that is not allowable is to transfer cost to a sponsored project merely because there are unexpended funds available, which would otherwise be returned to the sponsor. So basically spending on an award. For example, if you have a $100,000 award, you get to the end of it, you realize your PAA or post-award accountant has reached out to you and is asking for you to confirm final expenses so they can get a final invoice out, and you realize there's still $10,000 left on the award that weren't spent. That is not the time to decide to go find $10,000 worth of expenses to put on that award. Because that tells us is that you are trying to spend it out. And so if you get exactly $10,000 of expenses, 60, 30, 90 days after the award has ended, what that will tell an auditor is that you are spending it out. Without sufficient documentation, that's what they're going to assume you were doing. And then we have to be on the defensive on why that's not the case. So please spend your award, watch your award throughout the award period, and do not spend out your award after it is ended, or try to do this. It's specifically unallowable in uniform guidance, and I know in the past people have tried to manage payroll and other expenses at the very end, and we are collectively going to have to come up with better ways to manage this. And we are a resource and we're happy to help the best we can, but we have, as a university, we have got to get better about not doing this. Like I said, as a university, the audit risk associated with this is just too high and too great. Other factors that can affect the timing of a cost transfer. Of course, a cost transfer should always be processed within 90 days following the end of the month in which the original charge was initially recorded. And then other factors that could affect or shorten that 90-day window, of course, are the financial report due date or submission date, the carry forward request date, or the final invoice date. So for example, if you know the final invoice date or due date is 60 days or 90 days after the end of the award, you cannot submit cost transfers on the 55th day or the 85th day and expect that invoice to still be submitted or that financial report to still be submitted on time. Again, using those 90 and 30-day notices are key. The goal really should be to have everything finalized within 30 days of the end date of that award. And just know that another thing we want to highlight is that anytime you notice that an expenditure needs to be removed from a sponsored project, so there's been an error, you've accidentally charged payroll, for example, an award that should have never been there, the 90-day time limit does not apply in those cases. As soon as you notice an error in those instances, it has to be removed. However, as we mentioned before, depending on the age of the expense being removed, you may or may not be able to move it to the correct place. So if it belonged on another sponsored project, it may be too late to actually place it there, and it might have to be placed on an A or an E fund or a non-sponsored account. So then that brings us to the payroll retro funding process. And then again, this is just a quick reminder and review. So a reminder is that the following forms for the retro payroll accounting distribution are no longer available. The EPAF form and PeopleSoft HCM, along with the retro payroll manual form, shouldn't be used. So just make sure that you're using the current retro funding change form and that you're following the instructions as outlined on the form. So make sure you're using the original paycheck date and not the RPay date. So if it's already been retroed once, make sure that you're digging into the details to get the original paycheck date and not the date of the RPay. And then always make sure that you're providing supporting documentation and that you're submitting those forms to the retro JE mailbox. And just a reminder, no manual forms or hard copies will be accepted. So if you want to get it processed, make sure that you're submitting it to using the right form and submitting it to the right mailbox. We are still getting some of these forms. Some of these forms are being sent to the GFM Pay or the Pay JE mailbox. These mailboxes are set up and being manned for different purposes and different reasons. And so whether or not those individuals manning those mailboxes know to forward these requests to the retro JE mailbox isn't guaranteed. So just please make sure you're sending the retro JE or retro funding changes to the retro JE mailbox and not these. And then again, just a reminder of the process. Once you submit your retro funding change request, the controller's office will generate the JE and upload those to HCM distribution. And it takes about 3 days, 2 to 3 days, unless there's additional review required. So it's a lot faster than it was, and they're easily identifiable. They'll be it'll have a RPay number associated with it, and the lines will be pink once they're out there and available. And just remember to complete the account changes within 90 days of the pay date. And then just a reminder that workers' comp and unemployment will post after the 1st and the 15th payroll. And if there's been any RPay adjustments in between the 1st and the 15th, those adjustments are automatically calculated into whatever post after the 1st and the 15th. So this is what the form looks like, and it can be found on the homepage of the Controller's Office website. And if you get closer, just remember the paycheck date needs to be the original pay date and not the retro pay date. We're still sending back quite a few forms because they're putting the RPay date. And remember, the original paycheck date is what we're using to calculate the 90 days, not the retro pay date. So for cost transfers that are greater than 90 days, and again, this is for any cost transfer, not just payroll. We've been doing this for the payroll cost transfers for a while. So this, I think everybody's in the groove for this currently. But with the cost transfer policy, this also goes into effect for any cost transfer of any expense. So whether it's a voucher or an expense module correction, if it's older than 90 days, you need to be preparing a cost transfer memo because the auditors are looking at everything. And this is, again, to protect you guys, the PIs, and the university as a whole. And the cost transfer memo should address these following 4 questions. The first one is, why was this expense originally charged to the incorrect account? The second one, how does this expense benefit the project it's being moved to? The third question is, why is this request being requested more than 90 days after the original transaction date? And then last but not least, how are you planning to prevent this type of error or situation from happening in the future? So some helpful tips. Again, as I mentioned throughout the whole webinar, please pay attention to those 90 and 30-day project ending notifications. Those really are key. That's the point at which you can decide, do I need a risk account? Do I need to start requesting or engaging Sam and my PI for a no-cost extension because I have so much funding left? To avoid some of these risky things that we've already talked about, these unallowable things. I have $20,000 left on my project. I still have work that needs to be done. Let's start having those conversations about no-cost extensions. and things of that nature versus, trying to spend out the award and things of that nature. Let's avoid those high-risk situations. Again, establish and use risk accounts so we can avoid parking charges and unnecessary cost transfers. Make sure you're reviewing payroll regularly. Make sure the account change forms are being done. Payroll's being updated. If, a project's ending, do a payroll report on that project. Who's currently hitting there? All right, let me do the account changes for those folks and get them wherever they're going to be moving to next, and so on and so forth. Make sure you're allocating purchase card expenses appropriately in the beginning. And if you can, make sure that none of those P cards are defaulting to a grant project in the beginning. It's a lot easier if you have those cards defaulting to an A or an E fund to move expenses from those accounts onto a sponsored project versus in between two sponsored projects. So just keep that in mind. And make sure you're watching your budgets and that you're spending within the budget categories. We run into a lot of issues with sponsors and with collection as it relates to invoice collection, as it relates to budgets and people spending outside or over budget. So to avoid those issues, just make sure you are watching your budgets and requesting rebudgets as necessary. This will prevent a lot of heartache in the end and from write-offs being pushed to your e-funds. So let us know if you have issues with any of that or have any questions. Of course, your SAM administrator is more than happy to help. And then last but not least, make sure you're charging your grant and cost share as it's incurred and within ratio. This is another area that when it comes time for invoicing as well as financial reporting, that causes a lot of issues and a lot of questions to be asked, and potentially can lead down the road to write-offs that can be pushed to department e-funds because the sponsor is rejecting and refusing payment because we haven't cost shared appropriately and within ratio with what we spent on the grant. So these are just some helpful tips that we've accumulated as it relates to what we see centrally across all colleges. And with that, here's where you can find additional resources. This is the Office of the Controller, Grants and Funds Management, webinars and training. And we are currently testing a grant dashboard. So we hope to have that released here soon, and we'll have more information on that. I think you guys will be very pleased with it because it will actually show cost share as well. But more information to come on that soon. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Actually, Tiffany, also the policy and procedure, this new policy is located on the controller's website on the policy and procedures page. So you can find that there as well. And we have a question, will the webinar be posted to the PS Finance Resources page or elsewhere? We're actually posting it, if you want to move backwards to that previous slide, Tiffany, we're actually going to post it on the Grants and Funds Management page specifically. And you will find that information down in the webinars and training section of that page. So that can be found on the controller's website as well. All right, you're welcome. Any more questions? Why are some account codes like 51200 or 51400 flagged by the controller's office so that we can't use them when rebudgeting through USERA?
Some account codes are locked. Payroll accounts are always locked. So those have to be coordinated.
I would say typically, this is Marie, that we would rather you stick with your budgets in the budget category account codes rather than going to specific account codes that are classifying the type of employee. So for example, if you just have salaries for $1,000, I mean, the general idea is that the budget would just have that the $1,000 in the blanket salaries budget code, and then whatever specific account code the employee falls under would be available for use.
Okay.
Okay.
Any more questions? Go ahead, Tiffany.
Oh, I was just going to point out that, if you have additional questions regarding cost transfers or anything of that nature, you can always reach out to your postal work accountant, and you can also email the RetroJ email box. Like I said, here centrally, we're here to support you guys. At the end of the day, everything contained within this policy is very similar to anything that you'll find at other universities. It's not anything new or outrageous from that perspective. We spent a lot of time doing research and comparing to what other large universities were doing. So hopefully this helps take out kind of the gray and puts a little bit more black and white for you guys as well as for us as it relates to what you can do and what you can't do and what's allowable and what's not allowable. Again, at the end of the day, we just want to help support the spending of the grants and protecting the university and the PIs and you guys as a whole. And we're here to support you guys the best we can. And so hopefully you guys find that this is helpful, and we'll have some more guidance coming out as well as some procedures and possibly even a cost transfer form. So if you don't want to do a letter or a memo every time, it will be a fillable form that you can use as well. So more information to come on that over the next couple weeks.
Okay. So Mike is saying, this is related to Jessica's questions. The money was budgeted in the specific account codes, and we couldn't move to the generic. All right. I don't think that was a specific question, maybe just a statement, Mike.
And we can always, if you want to, you can always send us an email with the specific example, and we can kind of look into it and see what the issue potentially was. But I think back to Marie's comment, if it's possible, we always prefer to budget at the highest level. So, salaries, and not try to get down to the, account code level to try to limit some of those issues.
We have Pam Gillum who's saying this was very helpful. Thank you. Mike Turner saying this was great. Thank you so much. Any other questions before we end our session this morning? If you have some friends that would benefit from from participating in this session, we have another one next week, Thursday evening at 6. So we're actually offering an evening session because we know that people have their day jobs and it's kind of hard to join during the day. So we have that scheduled for 6 p.m. All right, we have a question. So you said it takes 3 days for the retro pay. I've had to do some of the T&E reports, and I know they are supposed to be complete by tomorrow. So what happens if they're not done in time?
Well, we understand that, the time and effort reports are due tomorrow. However, this is the first cycle. This is the first time we're doing this in the new system. We just encourage you to keep plugging along, and if you have issues or things of that nature, to pull us in the best you can. If there's issues with routing, things of that nature, if you notice discrepancies, things aren't matching, whatever the case may be, pull us in so we can get those issues handled. And then if you have issues because people aren't approving, if they're getting stuck in the queues because PIs are refusing to sign in and approve, you can start copying us in to those follow-up emails that you send so that at least we're aware of those situations. But I mean, we realize it may take a little bit longer than tomorrow to get all these submitted. Right now, as of this morning, we are at 2,200.
Wow.
No, not 1,200. I apologize.
Okay.
We're at 1,200 fully executed reports out of 3,200. So, I mean, we've got a little ways to go.
So Dot's saying she has somebody who's moved out of state and we cannot get in touch with her. So Dot, I would reach out to Tiffany's team and work through that situation with them specifically. I'm sure you guys can come up with a plan. Okay, any more questions?
Well, we appreciate you guys taking the time to join us, and hopefully everybody is, staying safe, and
All right,
we
so
appreciate your feedback.
Dot is asking, once they're executed, do I need to certify them next? Once you execute, you verify them and you submit them, then they move Dot to the supervisor, who will then certify, which then will move to PIs, who will then certify. So you're just verifying the information and submitting them to move through the levels of approval.
That's correct. Once the business manager verifies that, the report basically matches HCM and you're not aware of any additional changes that need to be made, you release the report to the employee approves, and then it goes to their supervisor and any PIs on which, they worked, on grants that they worked. And then once all those approvals are done, the form will become fully certified or fully executed.
Okay. All right, I think that is it, Tiffany. We have a lot of thank yous, and you're welcome. The team has done a great job. So if you want to move to the next slide, I think.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We appreciate everything that you do every single day. All of you are awesome, just in case you haven't heard that today.
All right, guys, have a great rest of your day. We'll see you on the next session.